ago, it was 2 years ago at Rosh Hashanah, 2 years ago at Rosh Hashanah, that I made the decision, after a lot of long, hard thought and study, after 42 years of believing in Yeshua, absolutely committed evangelical Christian Jewish believer in Jesus, I renounced him as Saviour, as Lord, as Messiah. I renounced him round about the time between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That was 2 years ago. At this time, 2 years ago, I was listening and had been listening to Rabbi Skobach at JEWS for Judaism. And in fact, I'd listened to all his lectures, every single video, because I wanted to understand for the first time in my life, because I'd never really investigated it, why the Jewish faith didn't accept Jesus as the Messiah. Right? I'd already been listening to Michael Brown and read one of his books. At first I was impressed with him, and then I was not impressed with him. And I could see flaws and weaknesses. And I just felt, no, I think it's time I listen to the Jewish side of things. Because as a Jewish believer in Jesus for 42 years, you are told, don't listen to the rabbis. Don't listen to the rabbis. Jews for Jesus, all missionaries to the Jews, and all fellow Jewish believers saying, don't listen to the rabbis, because they are the ones they believe that are unwilling to accept Jesus as the Messiah. They also believe that some rabbis know he's the Messiah and are deliberately hiding him from the Jewish people, which is the old Christian thing of the Jewish conspiracy. So it's very anti-rabbi. But suddenly, after 42 years, and with the internet, and I'd logged on to JEWS for Judaism, and I listened to Rabbi Skobach, and I could see a lot of what he was saying made sense. So I was listening to a lecture every single day, and I was also listening to other rabbis, Rabbi Stuart Federow, I read his book, and also Rabbi Tovia Singer, right? I was just wanting to understand the position. I firmly believed in Yeshua, and I assumed I would die in this faith. I really did, right? Because I was 60, I was 60 then, 59, 60. So I assumed I would die in this faith. I believed I was going to go to heaven, and that Jesus has secured me a place in heaven and everything. I had a cross up on my wall, which I'd had up there for over 30 years. But it was during the time between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that things seemed to come to a head. And then I made the decision. And it's strange way, it was with some regret to renounce this belief. I suddenly realised none of it made sense. I could see that from what the rabbis were saying, it was very, very obvious to me. Because remember, I knew all this, the prophecies and everything that Jewish believers in Jesus believe in, and I'd studied theology. But I could see everything they were saying, the rabbis, made perfect common sense. I could see how they'd taken scriptures out of context, how they misread things, how Christianity perverts the Hebrew scriptures. And it was all so obvious, right? And it was this obviousness that drew me to the very hard conclusion that I had to give it up. Now, like most Jewish believers in Jesus and most born-again Christians, I'd had spiritual experiences, inverted commas, but I had to ask myself the hard question. What am I going to believe? Am I basing my faith solely on spiritual experiences, or am I going to base it on the Hebrew Bible and as I understand it and what it's saying? And I decided that I was going to put myself in line with how I saw the Bible. In other words, we're presented with information. I'd heard the Christian side for 42 years. I understood it thoroughly. And now I was listening for the first time in 42 years. First time in my life, I was hearing the Jewish side. And it was hearing the Jewish point of view, the Jewish perspective, that I realised Jesus was not the Messiah, that in fact my belief in him was idolatry, which really shocked me. And I realised I had to give it up. I took down the cross from my wall, which had been up there for 30 years. I felt it was imperative that I clear out from my home before Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, everything to do with Yeshua and Jesus. So all Gospels, all New Testaments, anything with Yeshua on it, all the books, you amass, 42 years of paraphernalia, and put it in the dustbin, which I did. I would have liked to have burnt the New Testament. I wanted to, but because I live in a built-up area on a housing estate, somebody would ring the police if they saw a little fire going on, so I couldn't do that. So I just put it in the dustbin. And so, Yom Kippur, I am chronically sick with a very debilitating illness. There was no way I could go to shul on Yom Kippur. I didn't go Rosh Hashanah, I was just too ill. I, spend 18 hours a day in a blacked out room, lying down, really not well. So Yom Kippur, what I did, I didn't fast because I'm too ill to be doing any of that, because that would just make all my symptoms worse. And you might not know, but under the Jewish law, if you're ill and everything, you don't fast on Yom Kippur. If you're poorly and, your doctor says don't fast, you don't fast, you see. Because the preservation of life and the protection of life is more important than following laws. In other words, it supersedes laws, right? In other words, so this is why people don't have to fast on Yom Kippur if it will endanger their health, right? And I knew it would, because I've had this illness for decades, and I was sort of getting worse and so on. So I couldn't go to shul, I was just too ill. So I was lying in bed, and what I did on Yom Kippur, I was listening to a service online from a Reform synagogue at Central Synagogue in New York, and also then, you know how you do with the internet, going on to a London synagogue, Reform synagogue, because it's only the Reform that do online services, right? And I thought, well, this is although I wasn't brought up Reform, I was brought up Orthodox. I thought, well, this is good. It's better than, it's better than nothing. And it's still the Day of Atonement, and I'm listening to the service, and that's the most important thing. And I just lay there all day on and off, just listening to the service on Yom Kippur. Now, you might want to know, after leaving Yeshua 2 years ago, just between the 10 days of repentance, which is Teshuvah, between Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, that was the in-between phase when everything came to a head and I left Yeshua, right? So you might wonder, well, what's it been like since the last 2 years? Have you had any doubts? Well, surprisingly, no. I haven't had any doubts. In fact, everything has doubled in my conviction that he's not the Messiah, and I'm continually getting insights and seeing how perverted Christianity is at taking the Hebrew scriptures and misreading everything. And also all the things that Jesus was saying, I now can see just using my seichel, and from the knowledge, basic knowledge, even common sense as a Jew with the basic things that he is not the Messiah. And to get involved with anything to do with Jesus is actually idolatry. And so you might wonder, how did you come to believe in him anyway? Well, yes, that's a good question. I went to a Jewish high school, King David High School. You're thinking, how can you go to King David High School and end up believing in Jesus a few years later? How indeed. Well, I'm not making excuses. I take full responsibility for my decision. But understanding a little bit of a person's background can give you a little bit of clues of what contributes. I think my upbringing was quite sheltered. I went to the Jewish high school. I thought I had confidence, but I remember the Jewish youth leader said to me he didn't think I was very confident, and I took offence at that because I thought I was very confident. But what I realise now, he was comparing me to other girls, and compared to them I wasn't confident, and I think he was right. I can see it now. I wasn't really confident, and I didn't know how to navigate the world. I was quite protected and insular and everything. I thought other people knew better than me, and that was my downfall. When I was presented with the New Testament by somebody I knew who'd become what was in those days, in the 1970s, called a Jesus freak, I thought he'd lost it. I thought this is ridiculous, this really, stupid, or whatever to do with this. He's just a Jesus freak. But he gave me a New Testament, and I thought, well, isn't that nice? He's given me a present, and I didn't know what to do with it. I felt I couldn't give it away because it was a present. I don't know why, that's silly, isn't it? But I kept it. I was no intention of reading it, but then one day I did. Now, I started looking up all the prophecies that in the Gospels, that in the New Testament, that try and support the argument that Jesus is the Messiah. Now, when I looked up all these prophecies, I knew from my education that you always look at things in context. You look at what's written before and you look what's written after, and you have to get everything in context. You never analyse anything on its own, even in books, in fiction. You have to look at everything in context. And I was doing that, and I could see this does not make sense. This would not make sense. So 18 years of age, I knew what I was reading did not make sense. But my downfall was my lack of confidence in myself, that in what I believed. In other words, I kept still thinking other people know better than me. I was mixing a little bit with born-again Christians who were lovely girls. They were very together, very confident and very sure of themselves, and very peaceful, inverted commas, and I was very impressed. Because I was none of those things at that time. And you have to remember, my mother had only passed away, a year, 15 months, less even. My father disowned me. He wanted nothing to do with me because I was believing in Jesus. Everybody had disowned me, so I'm there on my own, and I'm obviously just lost my mother. I'm not very mature for my age. I'm not streetwise. I'm not worldly wise. I am gullible. I was gullible. People used to tell me, you're gullible, you believe anything. I was gullible. I was very, very gullible. And I just assumed everybody knew better than me. And that I think was my downfall. Because right at the beginning, when I looked at those prophecies, examining all these claims, I could see it didn't make sense. Even with my limited education, I could see it didn't make sense. I'd had a bit of a Jewish education. I'd gone to Cheder. I went to a Jewish high school. I knew it didn't make sense, and yet I somehow find myself embroiled in it. And I don't think, to be honest, that I really understood the implications of what all this belief was about and what it all meant and everything. A lot of things in the New Testament I couldn't even understand anyway. I mean, I've noticed this with a lot of people that, sometimes people get baptized and that you can tell they don't really understand what they're supposed to be believing. Because converting to another faith is very complicated and it can take a long time to actually understand everything and all the basics. And in credit to Catholicism, they do run courses and they try and make sure that, and they won't accept you as a Catholic until they're absolutely sure that you understand exactly what you're supposed to be believing and why you believe it and everything. That is the point of all their. They don't just accept people just because people say, "Oh, I believe in Jesus." You can't take the sacrament like that. They won't allow you. You have to go through a course, and they have to be sure that you understand it because they feel it's their obligation to make sure people understand what they're doing and what they're believing and everything, which is the correct way for anything. But evangelical Christianity, although it does run courses, doesn't really, is not perhaps not as thorough. Perhaps it's not as thorough. I didn't. I am amazed at how I kept on with this belief. But I think one of the things was spiritual experience. Because like a lot of born agains, you have these spiritual experiences. But you see, now I realise spiritual experiences do not denote the truth. In other words, a spiritual experience might not mean what you think it means. For instance, St. Paul knew from the Hebrew scriptures that Jesus couldn't be the Messiah and that Jesus was speaking blasphemy. He knew that as an Orthodox Jew, a Pharisee. But what changed everything for St. Paul was the spiritual experience. He believed he met Jesus, and Jesus said this and Jesus said that. Now, I don't think anybody would deny that something happened there to St. Paul, but we have to ask the question, does it mean what we think it means? And could it mean something else? Now, my experience of 42 years of Christianity is they don't ask a lot of questions. And you would never get any Christian asking this question. Maybe this spiritual experience that he had wasn't true. Maybe something happened, but it doesn't mean what it's supposed to mean. Maybe St. Paul was deceived. There's all sorts of things. And of course, within Christianity, you don't ask questions. But of course, when I was on JEWS for Judaism, I was being confronted with and posed with a lot of questions that I'd never thought about before. And it was all these questions, common sense questions, common sense, that led me to the conclusion, and it was very reluctantly, that I had to give up this belief because it didn't make sense according to the Hebrew scriptures. I wanted it to make sense because I'd held this belief for 42 years. I definitely believed I was going to heaven. I definitely believed Jesus was the Messiah. I definitely believed everything. And here I was seeing for myself from the Hebrew scriptures that it was all wrong. I can't begin to tell you how devastating it was. And I still feel a bit devastated by it, even 2 years on. I find it's like I've gone through some traumatic experience and I'm still sort of, it's like I'm all at sea from it. It's like, I can't believe this has happened. I suppose the way I describe it's like the breakup of a marriage. If you've been married for 42 years, you've had a wonderful marriage, so you believe, and then you find out. things. And all these years you're believing something about somebody and you're suddenly realizing it's not true. This is not true. It's not true. And in the same way, a spouse is devastated when they realize what they believed about their partner is not true. That's the same way I feel. It's absolutely devastating. It's devastating. But it hasn't caused me to doubt. It's just left me feeling very, very puzzled about everything. Because you're kind of thinking, I've been kind of thinking, why did I have to go through all of that? 42 years. I wasn't happy in the church. The fact of the matter is there is anti-Semitism in the church. A lot of born-again Christians, some of them are very nice and they have a positive attitude towards the Jewish people, but there is anti-Semitism within the clergy. They don't, to be honest, the Christian world doesn't particularly like Jews. This is a fact. It is a fact. They do have a disparaging view of the rabbis. They have a disparaging view of the rabbis. They have a disparaging view of Torah. They have a disparaging view of Judaism as it's practiced. They do like the Jewish festivals, but that's because they give them a Christian meaning. They pervert everything and they use the Jewish festivals and then to prove and to enhance the case that Jesus is the Messiah. But in terms of respect for, say, the Orthodox Jew trying to put into practice the commandments of God, they have no respect. They have no respect. They consider it a waste of time. I can't begin to tell you how much it used to hurt me sitting in churches, hearing the New Testament read, and particularly the Gospels, where the Pharisees are just slagged off. The Jews this, the Jews that, the Pharisees that. It's just all negative, negative, negative. Jesus is most of the time negative, 98% negative against the Jewish leaders at that time. Everything is the Jew negative. It's awful. Now you have to remember, I, as a Jewish believer in Jesus, in common with all born-again Christians, all Jewish believers in Jesus, read the Bible, if not once a day, then twice a day. We all went to church at least once on Sunday, if not twice on Sunday. We all went to Bible study in the middle of the week, and we would all perhaps be going to other church or Messianic meetings. So can you imagine that the Christian world and Jewish people who believe in Jesus are reading over and over and over again this New Testament that is so negative towards the Jews, towards Orthodox Jews? Because for the Christian, they think all Orthodox Jews are like the Pharisees portrayed in the New Testament. And because they're reading the New Testament and the Gospels all the time, they're being fed over and over and over again. They're getting the same information. It's no wonder that the Christian world has a negative. It's amazing. It's not even worse than it could be even now towards the Jews, because it's all negative. I put up with all that for 42 years, but I believe mostly because of my spiritual experiences, and also rereading only hearing the Christian interpretation of the Hebrew Scriptures, that Jesus was the Messiah. So in a sense, I brainwashed myself by rereading and accepting the Christian interpretation of the Hebrew Scriptures. So I'm accepting the Christian interpretation of the Hebrew Scriptures, but I don't know what the Jewish interpretation is. I didn't know what it was. And I tell you, most Jewish believers in Jesus don't. And they will never know, because they have been told over and over again, do not listen to the rabbis. Right? Because they are demonized. These are the people that are against Jesus. These are the people that are against God. These are the people that are spiritually blind. Now, what is so awful about St. Paul, and he's done a terrible thing, St. Paul. I think this is the worst thing St. Paul has done as a Jew. This is the worst thing I think he's done as a Jew. Right? Originally, he didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. He understood it from Hebrew scriptures. He was a Pharisee. Of course, Jesus wasn't the Messiah. He understood it. He understood it that Jesus was speaking blasphemy. Then he has a spiritual experience on the road to Damascus, and it all changed. So he believes his spiritual experience. He believes he's met Jesus. Jesus said this. Jesus said that. Then he goes back to the Hebrew scriptures, and he tries to put the Hebrew scriptures in line and in sync with his spiritual experience. So instead of going to counselling with a rabbi about, oh God, something's happened to him, this weird experience, and what does it mean, and am I going nuts, or can it be true? Instead of seeking counsel from a fellow Orthodox Jew about this strange spiritual experience, he doesn't do that. He just believes it. He believes it 100%. And then he's going back to the Hebrew scriptures and changing the interpretation to put it in sync with his belief in Jesus. And the worst thing that St. Paul has done is instead of saying to the rabbis at the time, the Pharisees at the time, look, you believe what you believe, but I'm going to believe in this Jesus, and that's the end of it. If you don't want to believe in him, that's your business, but I'm going to believe in him. And we'll just have to agree to differ. Now, this is what most people in the world do, don't we? We say to one another, well, you believe what you believe, I believe what I believe, and we'll just have to agree to differ, right? This is what we say to each other about most things. Religion, politics, all sorts. We say, well, we'll have to just agree to differ, right? St. Paul couldn't do that, no. What St. Paul did was a terrible thing, a shocking thing, that contributed towards the anti-Semitism against the Jewish people over the centuries. He said, you are spiritually blind. You are spiritually blind. And what this has done has created in the Christian, and he sent a letter to the churches saying the Jews are spiritually blind. Right? It's there in the New Testament. And so what happens is the Christian world has nothing but contempt for the Jew. They believe, the born-again Christians, Jews for Jesus, that all Jews are spiritually blind, that we can't understand our own scriptures, that we need prayer from the non-Jewish Christian to pray for the Jews to recognise that Jesus is the Messiah, and that we need Jews for Jesus and Christians to show us from our own scriptures that Jesus is the Messiah. They believe that rabbis don't have the capacity to understand our own scriptures. And this all comes from St. Paul. And this is a terrible thing that he's done. And he shouldn't have done it. He shouldn't have written it down. He shouldn't have sent that letter. Because that letter has developed in Christians over the centuries a total and utter contempt and the unwillingness to accept or consider the Jewish point of view regarding the Messiah. Jews for Jesus will not listen to the rabbis because they believe the rabbis are spiritually blind. They believe that the words of St. Paul in that letter are the words of God. Now, the Catholic Church, Catholicism and Christianity does not say that St. Paul is a prophet. He is not considered within Catholicism or Christianity to be a prophet. You'll never hear the phrase prophet St. Paul. You'll hear prophet Isaiah, prophet Ezekiel, prophet Jeremiah. You'll never hear prophet St. Paul, right? He's not considered a prophet. He's not considered a person who is speaking the words of God, because that's what a prophet is. If you get down to basics, that's what it is. It's coming from God. And yet, the way the Christians read the New Testament is they believe everything he says is from God. So the evangelical Christian, the Jews for Jesus, do believe that all Jews are spiritually blind. Now you have to ask the question now, where does it put somebody like me? Because I believed in Jesus for 42 years, and then I suddenly decided to listen to the rabbis and consider what they have to say. I wasn't listening to Rabbi Skobach with the intention of believing him. No, not at all. No, 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 no. I was a committed, I can't begin to tell you how much of a committed, I would have given my life for Yeshua. I would have given my life for Yeshua. I am telling you the truth. I was rejected completely by my late father. He wanted nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with me. I never saw him afterwards. He died. He wanted nothing to do with me. I was prepared to die for my faith. I was prepared to die for Yeshua. I was like ISIS, but with Yeshua. Seriously, I'm not joking. I would have allowed myself to be beheaded rather than deny Jesus. I wouldn't deny Yeshua as the Messiah. I'm really serious about this. 2 years ago, this time, I would have given my life for Yeshua. I would have chosen to have my head beheaded rather than deny him. That's how strong a believer in Jesus I was. But simply by listening to Rabbi Skobach giving talks on the Hebrew scriptures, on enlightening me, on the Jewish perspective, just listening to it every day, different videos, listening to all the videos, listening to Rabbi Tobias Singer, another knowledgeable rabbi who knows all about obviously Judaism and Christianity, and Rabbi Stuart Federer. And it was so blatantly obvious, almost right at the beginning. I knew I was in the wrong. I knew it. But I kept on listening because I'm not going to give up 42 years of believing in Yeshua just, on listening to one video. I had to be absolutely sure. And it was with terrible regret when I gave up Yeshua. It's I was glad, but I was sad. It was horrible. It was like a marriage coming to an end. And I still haven't got over it. Because I'm trying to make sense of these 42 years. And I believe that I was following the path of God. I believe that I was doing the right thing when I believed in Jesus. And you're thinking, well, what on earth was the point of it all? Why did I have to be sitting in those churches listening to, from the New Testament, them slagging off my own people? Why did I have to experience so much anti-Semitism from Christians, and from particularly horrible things from Christians who claim to love the Jews? So much horrible things I had to go through for my faith in Yeshua. And I was prepared to endure it because I believed in Yeshua. And I'm thinking, what was the point of all that? What was the point of all that? And so I don't know the answers to these questions. But I can only say that I was prepared to die for my faith in Yeshua. I did suffer an awful lot at the hands of the Jews who claim to love the Christians who claim to love the Jews for my faith in Yeshua. I was sexually assaulted by an ex-missionary to the Jews. Oh yeah, I was targeted, but I still believed in Yeshua. I had Christians who claimed to love the Jews being very mean, very hurtful towards me. I still wouldn't give up my faith in Yeshua. Nothing would get me to give up my faith in Yeshua. I wanted to be the seed that was sown and that bare fruit. Now, I think I did bear fruit in terms of I was trying my best to put into practice the good teachings that are in Christianity. So within Christianity, there are good teachings, help those who can't help themselves, help the hungry. I used to be very much into helping the homeless and helping the hungry, do good to people, charity. I mean, Christians do a lot of, there are good basic, there are good teachings within Christianity of charity and helping the poor and looking after people who can't help themselves and all that. So I think, although I was a Christian for 42 years, I think in terms of my behaviour as a Jew, in terms of doing things like charity and being a good person and trying to improve as a person and to forgive and all sorts of things, I think I have to be honest that it didn't make me a worse person. As a person, it made me a better person, because I was trying to be a better person. I was motivated to be a better person. And Christians and Messianic Jews are motivated to try and become better people. They are trying to become a mensch. Jewish believers in Jesus are trying to be good people, right? They're not trying to do evil, they're trying to do good. It's just that we are misled. I was misled to believe that Jesus, it was legitimate to believe in Jesus and to worship Jesus. That it was legitimate to say that Torah didn't matter anymore. That it was almost sort of like obsolete. You didn't really need to obey it. And all sorts of other beliefs. So there were certain beliefs that I, as a Jew, it was wrong of me to believe in, right? But there were other things as a Jew which I believed in and I was practicing that were good, because I can see myself looking over the 42 years. I did improve as a person. I did become more honest. I stopped sleeping with men. I was single. I didn't sleep with any man. I wouldn't sleep with any married man, right? I didn't sleep with any man. I was determined to save myself till I got married, because I was a Jewish believer in Jesus. No sex before marriage, so I didn't sleep with anybody. I was honest. I gave to charity. I was always looking to help people worse off than myself. So I was doing good, practicing good, but I was also misled and believing things that were wrong, you see. And so I suppose on balance, you might say, maybe I could have believed something even worse and be practicing things that were really evil, you see. And this is me trying to make sense of the whole experience. The fact is, when people do become Christians, born again Christians, whether they're Jewish or not Jewish, they are aspiring to become better people. And that is only a good thing. Even if you don't believe in the actual beliefs of the religion, if people are aspiring to be honest in their financial dealings with people, whereas before they weren't, then you could say, well, at least they're being honest. At least they're giving to charity. At least they're helping the poor. At least they are not stealing. You have to, suppose, try and look for the good. You acknowledge that all the beliefs are not good, but some of the beliefs are very good, right? So it's about having to stand back and be impartial and make a fair judgment and realise that basically I believe I was misled, and I wouldn't give up that faith because I was allowing that spiritual experience to dominate my adherence to Jesus, Yeshua. I wouldn't deny him because I honestly believed that God had called me to believe in Yeshua, that God had called me to accept Yeshua. And I thought that by not believing in Yeshua, I was being disobedient to God. But I had to question this when I listened to the rabbis and their analysis of the Hebrew scriptures. And it became so clear and obvious to me that I'd misunderstood everything, which meant, and which boils down to the fact is, and we have to ask ourselves this question, particularly if you are a Jewish believer in Jesus, just as it's easy to misunderstand people, your own family, your own husband, your own wife, your own brother, people you think you know very well, just as it's easy to misunderstand them, how easy is it for us to misunderstand God? And I now look back and say, did I misunderstand God? Did I misunderstand God? What was it that God was trying to convey to me? I think at the roundabout that time and further on at different times, I had a conviction that I was doing things in my life that weren't right? That I was sleeping with a married man. Right, that's not right. I do remember between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur having a deep sense of conviction that I had a feeling that God was disgusted with me because I suddenly felt very bad about all the married men that I slept with and all the wives, and suddenly realizing this is not right, what I'm doing. So looking back, God was communicating to me, ironically, in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, giving me a sense of remorse about the fact that I've been sleeping with married men. Right? Because I made a decision never, 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 never to sleep with a married man ever again. And I haven't. Do you know, recently I had a very gorgeous, drop-dead gorgeous man make it very clear, very, very clear, he was interested in me. And I was really smitten by him. But do you know what? You won't be surprised to hear this. He was a married man. And I thought, this is the greatest temptation I've ever had in all my life. But I stuck to it. No, I am not going to get involved. And I actually walked away from him, literally. He was smiling at me, like trying to show, one of those situations. And I suddenly looked down and I thought, what should I do? And it suddenly occurred to me, walk away. So I literally walked away from him. And the look on his face, I could see him looking. He couldn't believe what he was saying. I had literally walked away from him. And I demonstrated in no uncertain terms that I wanted nothing to do with him romantically. That he wasn't in with a chance. No way. And I suddenly realised I had the power to do that. He was making it as obvious to me he was interested. I thought he was absolutely gorgeous, and I was really smitten. But I thought, I don't want to let God down. I promised God, and I know I must never, never do that again. And so I walked away from this man. And I had the opportunity. And this man was in a good position. He was very comfortably off. He had ticked a lot of boxes as well as being gorgeous. But I thought, no, he's married. I'm not going to go there. Because I remember the remorse I felt and how I felt that God was annoyed with me for messing about with married men. So I've always, not messed about with married men. But as I say, when you're talking about understanding the ways of God and how he leads, I look back and I think, I was so sure that I understood how God was leading me. And evangelical Christians are very, very sure of themselves. But now, I'm not so sure. I'll be honest with you, I'm not so sure. And I think it's not that I'm doubting God. It's not God I'm doubting, it's me. Because I suddenly realised, it occurred to me, that it is possible to misunderstand God. It is possible to think that God is saying this to you when he's not saying this to you. He might be saying that to you, but he might be not saying this to you. And we have to be prepared. And evangelical Christians are not prepared to do this because they are all very, very, very sure of themselves. They never consider for one moment that they could misunderstand God, that they could misunderstand his leadings, that they could misunderstand what he's communicating. And so I look back at so many instances where I'm thinking God is communicating that it's okay to believe in Jesus. I am now asking myself, did I misunderstand God? And where was I going wrong? Because God is not at fault. The clear fault is with me and with the way I assume things. And it is the culture of evangelical Christianity, and you have to understand this, is that you will hear all the time Jewish believers in Jesus and born-again Christians saying, the Lord said this to me, the Lord said that to me, God said this to me, God said that to me. This is how Jewish believers in Jesus talk. They believe God is speaking to them and communicating to them directly. And I think now the way I believe in God is that I pray to God, but I don't, I now the way I look at God communicating with me is I look to God to just guide me through reasonable intelligence and common sense, and just trying to keep my feet grounded. In other words, what I'm avoiding now is listening to feelings and emotions. And this is the very thing that born-again Christians and Jews believers in Jesus do listen to. They're listening all the time to their feelings and to their emotions and to their impressions and to one another. And although they claim to be listening to the Word of God, inverted commas, they won't listen to any Jewish view stated by any rabbi of the Jewish reading of the Hebrew Scriptures. In other words, they're very taken up with their own impressions and feelings. You know, I feel this, I feel that, I feel this, I feel that, I feel God is saying, I feel God is saying that. Right? You'll never hear an Orthodox Jewish person using that language. You'll never hear anybody from Lubavitch using that kind of language. And the language of evangelical Christianity is they believe they have the certainty that God is communicating directly to them and that they always understand him 100% correctly. And what I've realised, and I will acknowledge, is it is very easy to misunderstand God. It is very easy to misunderstand the Hebrew Scriptures and to get the wrong end of the stick unless you are guided and you listen to other people who have studied the Hebrew Scriptures over centuries. And at least if you are going to listen to the Christian interpretation of the Hebrew Bible, then common sense would dictate that if you're going to listen to their point of view, the church's point of view of the Hebrew Scriptures, then at least you should listen to the Jewish point of view as well. because this is how you are only able to come to a decision on who overall is speaking correctly. In other words, when you go to jury service, you have to listen to the prosecution and you have to listen to the defence. Now, I was only for 42 years being only willing to listen to Jews for Jesus and Christian ministries and the church. I was not willing to listen to the rabbis. And so I would say to Jewish believers in Jesus, why not do what I did and just listen to what the rabbis have to say on Jews for Judaism? You don't have to believe it if you don't want to. Just listen. Think about it. Think about it. You're not compelled to believe it. You're just asked to consider it. Right? Like jury service. You just listen and you decide for yourself. Okay, you think I want to decide for myself. Well, at least if you're going to decide for yourself, listen to both sides of the argument, for heaven's sake. Why are you so willing to only listen to the non-Jewish world about the interpretation of the Jewish scriptures, but you won't listen to your fellow Jews? What is the matter with you? That does not make sense. That does not make sense. And so I would appeal to you, if you're listening at this time, at any time of year, or but particularly between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, is at least listen to what the rabbis have to say. Listen. For once in your life, just listen. And consider what your own people are saying. If you decide you want to stick with the church, you can do. You can do. If you want to continue worshipping Jesus as God, as the Son of God, you can do. But at least as a Jew, consider and listen to what your own people, who are smart, who are bright, who are savvy, who have thousands of years of history, of studious study, of the Hebrew of the scriptures, of the Torah, of our prophets. Listen for once in your life, and don't be so arrogant, and don't be so foolish and so stupid to believe the nonsense of St. Paul, who is saying that the Jewish people are spiritually blind. This is a lie. We are a smart, savvy, bright people. We are the people that gave the world Einstein. We are the world that gave the world barristers, lawyers, Jewish doctors, Jewish dentists. We are a smart people, and don't you think the Christian world knows it? So stop believing the lies of the church, which is always trying to disparage the Jew and put the Jew down. And for once in your life, just listen and consider what the rabbis have to say at Jews for Judaism.